And beginning introducing the subsystems of language, I am going to start with the morphology. That this is the study of the words that have meanings. In applied linguistics, the morphology can help us to understand how people build words and where they are making mistakes, especially when people are learning new languages. Then we have the syntax, that this is the study of how words are organized to form sentences. This includes rules of word order and sentence structure. Applied linguistics use syntax to help people form correct sentences and understand these sentence patterns in both languages, the native language and the second language. Then we have the pragmatics, that this is the study of how languages are used and the context that are used. This considers things like the tone and when it's appropriate to say depending on the situation. This, in applied linguistics, works to teach how, when, and why use these words in real life situations. Then, the semantics that focus on what words, phrases, and sentences work. Semantics helps applied linguistics to understand how the learners can process the meanings in the word and how they understand the vocabulary with clarity, especially when a word has many meanings.
So now we got phonetics, which studies the physical side of speech, how sounds are made, heard, and transmitted. It looks at how we use our mouth and vocal cords to produce sounds and how our ears and brains perceive them. On the other hand, we got phonology, which also studies the sound, but in a more systematic way, how sounds are organized in the mind and used to create meaning. It looks at sound patterns, rules, and which difference matter.
Applied linguistics show us how the language works in the real life. This has to do with the linguistic subsystems like morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, and in the studies of these language subsystems, for linguists, grammar is not only the rules that a language have, they also have a more detailed look at language, including not only syntax and morphology, but also phonetics, phonology, semantics, and lexis. For applied linguistics, the focus is more on a pedagogical grammar, the type of grammar designed for the needs of second language students and teachers. For after all, applied linguistics must be concerned that students not only can produce grammatical structures that are formally accurate, students must be able to use them meaningfully and appropriately as well. They recognize that grammar is not merely a connection of form, but rather involves the three dimensions of what linguistics refer to as morphological, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. They show us the importance of these three dimensions by means of a pie chart divided into equal and interconnected parts, labeled as form, meaning, and use. They feel this chart is useful as a conceptual framework for teaching grammar as it serves as a reminder that learners need not only to achieve a certain degree of accuracy, but that they also need to use the structures meaningfully and appropriately as well. This pie chart can show us a very helpful way so we can understand grammar by using this chart divided into three connected parts. The first part is the form. This form means the structure of the language and how this works to create words and sentences, and this includes the grammar rules, the order of the words, and the ending of these words. Then, the meaning. This is about what a sentence of a word actually means. The focus is on the ideas of the messages that we really want to express. And the last one is the use. This is about how and when we use the language in real life. And this depends on the context, the people, and the purpose of these words. And why is this model important? The model of Larsen Freeman can show us that grammar is not only about rules. This shows the learning grammar also means to the meaning of the words and how we use these words in real life situations correctly. So this shows the structure of learn, that is how it forms, like the structure, how it means, that is like the semantics, and when and how it's good to use these words, the pragmatics or the context on when we are going to use that words. So basically, this model can be helpful for teachers in education because it shows us that grammar teaching should be complete and not only searching the correct way to use it, but also searching the meaningful way and a useful way so we can use these words correctly.
So now we are going to emphasize the connections between the form and meaning across all those systems we talked. So we know that language is more than just words. It's a system that connects the form with the meaning. But what is that? Form includes sounds, letters, word parts, or sentence structure. It's basically how the language appears or is heard. Meaning, on the other hand, is the idea or the message that the form communicates. So now we are going to be going through every subsystem we talked before and analyzing the form and the meaning. So phonetics looks at the physical sounds of speech, how we make and hear them, and how even a small sound change affect meaning. For instance, sip versus ship, and how s versus sh changes the meaning radically, the first one being a verb and the other one being a noun. Now, phonology studies how sounds work in a particular language, which ones matter for meaning and how they behave in different positions. So, for instance, in English, the word cats ends in an S sound, but dogs ends in a Z sound. So, even though both are just the plural S, why does that happen? It's because English has a phonological rule that changes the sound of the S depending on the final sound of the word. So, even though the plural ending is spelled the same, it sounds different, and phonology explains that pattern. Now we got morphology that studies the structure of the words, like roots, prefixes, and endings. Changing a part changes meaning. So, for instance, happy versus unhappy, where the prefix un negates the meaning. Syntax is about how words are ordered in sentences. Word order affects meaning. For instance, the dog beat the man is very different from the man beat the dog. So, semantics focuses on the literal meanings of words and how those meanings combine in sentences. So, for instance, in the sentence, the sun is hot, each word carries a meaning. Sun refers to the star, and hot describes temperature. When combined in that form, the sentence communicates a clear and true idea based on the meaning of the words. Pragmatics, on the other hand, looks at the meaning in context and how it changes depending on the situation or tone. Can you pass the salt is a question in form, but really it's a polite request. So now we are going to see how applied linguistics works in practice. We know that applied linguistics doesn't just apply the theory to the real world, and it often starts with a real language problem, which may happen in everyday contexts such as classrooms, for us being future English teachers. Problems like how can we help students improve their listening skills? Why do certain grammar rules seem harder for learners to apply in a conversation? So the first step here is to identify the problem in its full context, the people involved, their goals, social background, and learning environment. Then the applied linguists collect data. So this might mean, in the educational field, observing the classroom interactions, analyzing the students' writing, or conducting interviews. The goal is to understand how the language is being used and why problems are happening. Next, they bring in the linguistic theories. Guy Cook, in his book from 2003, Applied Linguistics, emphasizes that the theories are tools, not fixed rules. So, depending on the issue, you might apply ideas from the syntax, pragmatics, or discourse analysis. But theories can also be adapted, questioned, or reworked, whatever be the case. Then comes the solution. This could mean designing better teaching materials, adjusting assessment tools, or improving communication strategies. So, whatever be the case, the solution must be practical, ethical, and effective. And finally, it's really important to evaluate. Did the solution actually work? Was it fair and helpful? If not, the process loop if not, the process loops back. Applied linguistics is about trying, adjusting, and improving.
I explain some key concepts and rules, why applied linguistics matters, and I also give you examples from English to make everything clear. Let's start with the basics. What is applied linguistics? Applied linguistics is a type of research that uses knowledge about language to solve real-world problems. It looks at how people learn language, how we teach them, how we translate between language, and how we understand or produce language in different situations. One of the most important topics is second language acquisition. This means learning a language that is not your first one, like learning English when your first language is Spanish. Learners go through a stage called interlanguage, where they mix elements from their native language with the new one. For example, a Spanish speaker may say he has 25 years instead of he is 25 years old, because in Spanish they say él tiene 25 años. This is a normal part of the learning process. Another key idea is linguistic transfer. This happens when learners use rules from their first language in the new one. Sometimes it helps. It is positive transfer, but sometimes it causes mistakes. That's negative transfer. Applied linguistics also talks about communicative competence. This means knowing how to use the language not only with correct grammar, but also in a polite or appropriate way. For example, in English we usually say, "Could you pass me the salt, please?" instead of "Give me the salt." The second one sounds too direct, even though it is grammatically correct. Now, let's look at some important rules or theories that help explain how we learn language. The first one is comprehensible input from Stephen Krashen. He says that we learn when we understand what we hear or read, even if it is a bit more difficult at our current level. For example, a student hears, "The boy is jumping. Look, he's jumping so high." Even if they don't know the word jumping, the visual context helps them understand it. Another rule is the affective filter hypothesis, also from Krashen. This theory says that we learn better when we feel relaxed, interested, and motivated. But if we are nervous or bored, it is harder to learn. Then we have the noticing hypothesis from Richard Schmidt. It says that learners need to notice new parts of the language to really learn them. For example, when a teacher explains the difference between "I went to the store" and "I've gone to the store," the student starts to see the meaning difference and can use both correctly. And finally, the output hypothesis from Swain. This theory says that speaking and writing help us learn, because they force us to think more deeply about the language. For example, a student says, "Yesterday I go to the market," but then realizes the mistake and says, "Yesterday I went to the market." That correction helps the student remember the past tense. Now, why is applied linguistics important for understanding how language is produced and understood? First, it connects theory and practice. For example, theories about grammar learning help teachers decide when and how to teach certain structures. If we know that the S in "she runs" comes later in learning, we don't need to force beginners to use it too early. Second, applied linguistics help us understand how we produce language. It studies things like grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and also cognitive and social factors, like attention, motivation, or interaction with others. Speaking is not just saying words. It involves planning, choosing the right expressions, and using them in real time. It also helps us understand how we receive language in listening or reading. Applied linguistics looks at how we recognize grammar, understand meaning, and use memory and context to make sense of what we hear or read. For example, when a student hears a sentence and understands the main idea, even without knowing every word, that's part of good language comprehension. Also, applied linguistics show us that language is not just about individuals, it happens in social and cultural contexts. We speak differently with a teacher than with a friend. We write a formal email differently than a text message. This is why teaching a language also means teaching how to communicate correctly in different situations. Finally, applied linguistics helps solve real problems. It helps teachers create better programs for second language learners. It helps governments make language policies like deciding if public schools should teach more than one language. It also supports the development of technologies like Siri or Google Translate and helps with therapy for people who have trouble with speech or reading. In conclusion, applied linguistics is a useful and practical field. It gives us tools to understand how language works in the brain, in society, and in real life. It helps teachers, students, translators, therapists, and even machines communicate better.